Hi, everybody. Welcome to this adult romance debut panel summer edition, probably the longest title that I have in this panel series to date. And I'm really excited to be chatting with these fantastic books that are all adult romance debuts. If you have any questions, then put them in the chat box, and I will try to remember to go to them at the end of the panel. We'll have some time for questions. If you don't know who I am, my name is Lily. I'm the moderator for the panel, and now we're going to have the authors introduce themselves before we jump into the questions. So, Christine, you want to start?
Sure. Well, hi, everyone. So I'm Christine, but I write as C.W. Rose. I am a fantasy and romance author by night and a healthcare professional by day. And I write about ordinary Asian women who find themselves in extraordinary circumstances, and they find themselves in sometimes love on the way, and these cinnamon roll men who adore them. I am also an ocean child, certified scuba diver and lifeguard, karaoke enthusiast, and a mom to a Pekingese dog that looks like an Ewok. And my debut ocean song will release on August 27th. And it's an Asian Romeo and Juliet meets The Little Mermaid, but set in the grittiness of the real world. Oh, that's it.
Swati, do you want to go next?
Yeah, happy to. Hi, everyone. I'm Swati Hegde, and I am the author of Match Me If You Can, which is a Desi romance novel set in India, which is where I also live. It came out with Dell Romance, an imprint of Penguin Random House, on June 4th this year. When I'm not writing, I also work as a fiction writing coach and editor for other authors. I also really enjoy karaoke, Taylor Swift. Music and books is pretty much my brand, I guess. And yeah, I think that's it about me.
Hi, my name is Ella Dawson, and I am the author of But How Are You Really, which also came out on June 4th. Swati and I are debut twins, and from Penguin Random House. And I am a sex and culture critic and romance enthusiast. And I write about relationships, mental health, abuse recovery, trauma, all the good stuff, all the fun, light topics. And this is my first book. And it is a second chance romance about two burned out millennials who attend their 5-year college reunion. And it's about discovering, maybe my life hasn't gone the way I expected. Maybe adulthood isn't exactly what I thought it would be. But, oh, my ex situationship has like grown up really well. Maybe there's something here that I didn't know was here. So it's about millennials. It's been called millennial cringe by a lot of Gen Z kids, and I'm wearing that as a badge of honor because I am very much millennial cringe.
I don't even know what that means. What does that mean?
Honestly, I'm still trying to figure that out too. I don't entirely know what it is that they're reacting to, and I'm like, I welcome it because it does take place in 2018, so I'm like, that is the time, that is the period. It is sort of a historical romance in that sense. And there's a lot of like references to BuzzFeed era internet journalism, but in like a critical way, not in a celebratory way. So it's fine. I welcome the Gen Z burns. It makes me feel loved and seen.
I feel like, I think I'm the youngest millennial, I think, because I just turned 28 in March. So I think I'm like the final, batch of millennials. And I don't know, I feel like I think it is a badge of honor to be a millennial. I mean, because I grew up on BuzzFeed, Ella, and like, um, I don't know, I just feel like being a millennial is a huge part of my identity as well. And I just feel like we have better fashion. Like, I'm sorry. Okay. Gen Z fashion doesn't cut it. And if there are any Gen Z viewers watching right now, I apologize, but that's just how I feel. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm an older millennial, and I agree with everything you ladies said. And it is a badge of honor.
The first question that I have for you all is kind of about, obviously, the theme is adult romance books. And I want to know from you all, what draws you to the romance genre, and have you always been a romance reader? Christine, do you want to start?
I would love to. So I have loved love ever since I knew what love was, right? I love love that makes you feel warm and fuzzy, couples who fight for the happy endings, couples who rediscover their love for each other. And I do like tragic love sometimes, even though I still prefer happy endings. And I think I'll always be romantic at heart. So I started reading fantasy books when I was a preteen, but as soon as some point I found myself more interested in the characters' relationships. And after that, I started reading the Sweet Valley series, which is a contemporary middle grade and young adult. I read all the way from Sweet Valley Kids to Sweet Valley University. And again, all I really cared about was the characters' romantic relationships and who they would end up with. Like I love the show Love is Blind. I don't know if you guys have seen that, but it's a show where contestants get to know each other through a wall, and they don't see each other until they propose. And I love it when they see each other for the first time, and it gives me like all the warm and fuzzies. It makes me so happy. And I'm also a role-playing game player. And again, I love the games where you have an option for a romance inside the game. And I would be that person that would look up all the romance options before the game started, before starting playthrough, and I would base my playthroughs around like my romantic partner of choice. So yeah, I'm a probably crazy romantic, and always will be.
Swati, do you want to go next?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I started reading romance when I was 15 or 16, when, I was first experiencing crushes, like actual crushes, as a high schooler. Before that, I used to read just fantasy, and I used to read a lot of Archie comics, and just graphic novels and all of that. And I think what I like the most about romance is also the reason I write romance. I remember when I first started reading romance, how much hope they would give me, because in high school I was bullied a lot. I was considered the dork, the nerd, the girl every guy would just get homework help from. Like I would do homework for all the guys in my class, and I just never really thought anyone would love me that way. And so I feel like romance was kind of like an escape for me, but also like a gateway to hope. Of like, on my worst days, I would read a romance novel and I'd feel like, hey, maybe it could work out for me. And I think that's exactly why I write romance as well, to give people hope, to make them smile on a bad day, and just give them all the warm and fuzzy feelings. Because what is life if it's not fuzzy and warm, right?
Yeah, I had very much the same. I was drawn to romance as like a teenager. I read a lot of YA romances, and then I think as an adult, I had absorbed so many judgy messages about what romance was as a genre that I stopped reading it. Um, Mostly because I just didn't know what I was missing. And I wrote a lot of erotica and nonfiction sex writing. So I was really interested in relationships and intimacy and desire, but didn't really understand how you could navigate that in fiction. And I wound up picking up a copy of a historical romance at like the little free lending library at my public beach when I was staying with my mom, and just got so engrossed in it and realized it's romance is about big feelings and about these female driven narratives very often. It's a place where marginalized identities are shown as people deserving love and deserving to be the main character. And so, especially during the pandemic, I just became an all romance all the time reader because I didn't want to deal with anything else. And I finally started writing my own romance, mostly because I was bored and had quit my job and was very burnt out, and then realized my parents had been, even like since I was a teenager, my parents were like, "You're going to be a romance novelist one day." And I was like, "No." And yeah, they called it. They were right.
I think that is a perfect segue to my next question, which is basically what has been your journey to your debut? Ella, do you want to start? Because you basically set up that question perfectly.
Yeah, sure. So I had been working in social media management and strategy for a long time. I worked for TED Conferences, the company that does TED Talks, and I had been there for 5 years and just became incredibly burnt out and crispy. I had some mental health stuff going on. I kind of hit the ceiling in terms of where my career could grow, and I decided to just quit and had no real plan. I had some savings, and I had just attended my 5-year college reunion, and it was such an intense, weird emotional experience that I was like, that would be the perfect setting and premise for a second chance romance. So I just gave myself permission to play and write this draft without any real intention of it being like a capital B book someday. I really wanted to live in this fantasy space. And then during the pandemic, it became the thing that I spent all my time on because there was nothing else to do. I was very lucky that I had already built a relationship with Jamie Carr, who's an agent at the book group, and she read my draft and was very encouraging and was like, "You have no external conflict, so go rewrite it, but then come back to me in like 6 months." And she was a real advocate for the book. She signed me with the book group. And then we did a lot of editorial revision together as well before taking the book out on submission. And I wound up being very lucky and sold the book to Dutton Books. My editor, Maya Ziv, is also just a complete genius. So it felt kind of like dominoes falling, like everything kind of worked out, but every step of the way was also so grueling. Like I tend to forget all of the hard work that went into every single step because looking back, it's like, oh, what a fairy tale. But yeah, I was just a very depressed, angry person, and I decided to write a romance to not think about my life. And it wound up turning into this beautiful book, and I'm very grateful. But yeah, publishing is a very chaotic, weird space. And I'm really grateful to be connecting with other debut authors because I feel like this has been the hardest part is actually okay, the book is done and it's out there. Now what? How do we make people read it? So happy to be here.
Swati, do you want to go next?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think my journey is a little different from Ella's in the sense that I've kind of been writing like for fun, I guess, since I was 7 years old. I used to write short stories, and then I think when I was like 11 or 12, I wrote my first book. I just filled up like this thick like diary with like 300 pages in it. I just filled that up with a handwritten fantasy novel, and I would like make all the girls in my class in middle school. I would make them read it and then have them write praises for the author at the end of the book. Oh my god, I was such a weirdo. But then I decided to start pursuing like actually getting traditionally published when I was 21 years old. I wrote 6 books between the ages of 21 to 26. And then and I queried each of them to literary agents. And my sixth book, which is Match Me If You Can, is the one that got me a literary agent and then a book deal. So my journey was very just hard work and also just luck, obviously, at the end of it. But it's also just a lot of blood, sweat, tears, and a lot of am I going to make it? Is this even worth it? Well, even if it's not worth it, I'm going to keep trying anyway because I'm stubborn as hell. So I think that's what really got me to this point in my journey is that I'm just excessively stubborn. I refuse to give up, which can sometimes not work in my favor. But usually I think it's worked out well for me. And I'm very grateful for where I am today, even though it's been, oh God, it's been such a hard journey. And I feel like whenever people ask me how I've gotten here and I tell them the story, I feel anxious because I'm like, am I demotivating them? Because it took me like, I started writing to get published at 21 and now I'm published at 28. So it's been like a 7-year journey with 6 books, 5 of which haven't been published yet. And I always wonder, like, is this going to demotivate people? But then that's just how publishing is. Like, you don't know who's going to make it with the first book and who's going to make it with the 6th one. But the point is, if you love writing and you feel like it's cathartic or gives you hope or makes you want to give other people hope, you keep writing. So that's what I did. And here I am.
What about you, Christine? How's your journey been so far? I know your book is the only one who hasn't been published yet.
It's felt really long. And Swati, I completely agree. I think stubbornness and perseverance get you a long way in publishing. And I would say querying is like feeling the highs and the lowest lows, because you could get a full request on one day and then a form rejection the same day, right? So So Ocean Song is actually my second novel. My first one was shelved. I queried for close to 6 years, and I racked up about 250 rejections between the two novels. I did end up getting one agent offer last year, but as luck would have it, the agent left her agency the day before our call. And then I wound up with two small press offers at the same time. Right, so at the time, I had heavily revised my manuscript. I considered turning them down to keep looking for an agent, but ultimately it did feel right to go with my current publisher. So I am signed with a small publisher right now. And yeah, and they feel like the correct champion for Ocean Song.
Swati, do you think you're gonna go back to the other five?
Okay,
Like
so
the other
this is
five books?
actually a little bit of a fun story that I can't completely go into because the fifth book, like the one I queried right before Match Me If You Can, is actually going to be my second romance novel with my publisher. It's releasing in spring 2025. Unfortunately, I can't say anything about it because we haven't done the cover reveal yet, and I really have been told to not talk about it until we have an actual cover to promote the book because that gets more eyeballs. But yeah, so that shelved book number 5 is gonna be my second published book. As for the other four, one of them I've actually completely rewritten it, and I'm hoping that will be my book 3. The others are all like, I don't know. I feel like they're so bad. I don't even want to look at them. Like I would just cringe looking at them. So I feel like I need more. I don't know, prowess as an author to go back and rewrite them enough to make them publish worthy. But yeah, I do think, a book is never truly dead. I think you can always bring a book back to life, regardless of what shape it's in or regardless of how many rejections you've gotten. So maybe someday. Yeah.
I'm really curious to know from you all, what was the first romance book that you remember making an impact or like an influence at all on you in any way? Christine, do you want to start?
I can, yeah. So the first romance book I remember having an influence on me was actually Radiance by Grace Draven. It's a fantasy romance, and that was the first time I learned that fantasy and romance could be in the same genre, and that made me so happy. Because so the story is a pretty much an arranged marriage and a forced proximity story with a great banter between a human woman and a Kai man, which in this fantasy world is a race of like strong gray-skinned humanoid warrior types, and how they learn to love and appreciate each other's races and their similarities and differences. So that kind of propelled me into like romantasy and fantasy romance, even though I still love my contemporary and my rom-coms.
What about you, Swati?
Yeah, so I think it was actually the first romance novel I ever read. And it made such a huge impact on me because it was after I read this book that I decided I want to start writing romance. Because up until this point, I was 15 years old. And up until that point, I'd only written like fantasy novels, like for fun and to get praises from people in my class. So this book was called My One and Only by Kristen Higgins. She now writes women's fiction. She doesn't write romance anymore. And it was a really lovely romance novel about a divorced couple who are like in forced proximity. They have to take a road trip to somewhere. I read it like many years ago, so I don't really remember it. 13 years ago now, but it's basically divorced couple, forced proximity, and they realize they are actually meant to be together, and they fall in love again. And it just felt like I was hit in my chest with all these feelings, and I was like, oh my god, I want to feel like this forever when I'm reading a book, and I want to make people feel like this when they read something of mine. And that's actually how I got into writing romance, because literally Kristen Higgins is the author that, like, I think she had like 6 or 7 books out at that time in the romance genre, and I binged all of them in like the next couple of months. So yeah, that book, My One and Only by Kristen Higgins, it's probably like 15 to 20 years old at this point, but it's a lovely book, and I owe my career to reading that book, I think.
Sorry, hang on. My landlord is knocking on my door. Can you come back to me?
I will. We'll come back. I wanted to ask about in both Ocean Song and Match Me If You Can, readers might see elements of stories that they might recognize, like The Little Mermaid or Emma. Could you both talk about what it's like to write within the genre of romance with these elements in mind and how you make it your own and manage expectations? Christine, do you want to start?
I can, yeah. So this is a great question. So to be honest, I feel like The Little Mermaid is a very, very common comp among mermaid romance novels, and there have been some really amazing retellings of it. So in Ocean Song, there's still an undersea queendom, so I made them a matriarchal society, so it's not a kingdom. I gender swapped Ariel to a mer prince, and like Ariel, he's very inquisitive and he's also very curious about the surface world. I took out the aspect of the deal with the sea witch, and he does not lose his voice, and he doesn't fall in love with a human princess, but he falls in love with a regular sassy human woman who isn't afraid to tell him off. So I thought that it would be a fun twist to put like a BIPOC and also a real world spin on it.
Yeah, can I go next? Yeah. So Match Me If You Can is obviously a loosely inspired romance novel based on Jane Austen's book Emma. And it's funny because when I first read Emma, like many, many years ago, Emma is all about matchmaking and mismatchmaking and meddling. And I just remember reading it. And of course, I know it's a book set in like with the 1800s in Victorian England, or I'm sorry if I'm getting the time periods wrong. I don't read a lot of historical, but it's in England in the 1800s, and it's like I just remember reading it, and I just thought this book is so Indian. Like, even though it's not Indian, like the concepts, because like there's so much meddling and like matchmaking and like I know what's right for you more than you do. And that's such an Indian like mindset for like a lot of people, like family wise. Like I know like a lot of people, young people would say their parents are always trying to meddle and matchmake them with people. And I just remember thinking to myself, maybe if someday if I want to write like a romance novel, I could maybe retell Emma in an Indian style. And that's kind of how Match Me If You Can came to be. But I think I did have a lot of fun with changing certain elements. For example, in Emma, one thing I really wanted was to see Mr. Knightley's point of view, because I'm a sucker for dual POV romance. So in Match Me If You Can, you get dual POV. So you have the hero Jemon's point of view as well, and you see him. He's always loved Gia, the main character, and so you kind of get to see that perspective of Mr. Knightley that was not there in Emma. There's also a lot of contemporary stuff. I do think it's a very millennial book, although I don't know what readers have been saying about that because I've stopped reading reviews. There's also a lot of foodie elements in it because the hero, he owns a pub and he's a culinary expert, and it's just it was just so much fun retelling the story in my own way. I think after like the 30% mark of the book, the story completely diverges from what happens in Emma. But overall, I think the roots and the core of Match Me If You Can is definitely still inspired by Jane Austen's book. And yeah, I'm just really excited that a lot of readers are also liking the Emma aspects of the book.
Okay, Ella, what is the first romance book you remember making an influence on you in any way?
Yeah. Sorry for popping out. My landlord thought this was the best time for the exterminator to come. So I had to let him into the apartment. The first romance that I remember really making an impact on me was Maya Rodell wrote this amazing historical romance called What a Wallflower Wants. And I think I just, again, grabbed it at like a little free library. And it was about a sexual assault survivor who was kind of processing what had happened to her, and given that it was a Regency era romance, she had like no concept of sex or consent or desire. So she was really struggling with that. And she winds up falling for this just like the sweetest man who is, I'm trying to remember, I think he was some type of working class figure who was masquerading as an aristocrat, but he just completely understands what she's been through and what she needs. And I think for me, I read that around 2017 when we were having this huge national conversation about, or international conversation about Me Too, and the Kavanaugh hearings were happening for the Supreme Court. So I was really looking for thoughtful representation of sexual assault recovery, and I just stumbled across this book, and it completely changed my understanding of what romance as a genre was capable of and the types of issues that were being explored. And I just immediately was like, I want more of this. And so that for me was really eye-opening and amazing. And I read all of Maya's back catalog and then went on to like Sarah McLean and Lisa Kleypas and just like couldn't stop. But yeah, I'm really glad that I found that book.
And I want to ask about frustration in the career because I think it was both a trait that your main characters share in But How Are You Really and Match Me If You Can. So I want to know from both of you how did you detail and create those professional situations and the crises for your characters, and also were there elements of this part of their lives that changed throughout drafting? Swati, do you want to start?
Yeah. So in Match Me If You Can, because it's dual POV, both my main characters are struggling with career and just figuring out what they want to do in their lives long term. And I think I feel like that's so relatable for like everyone, because I don't know a single person, and I don't think a single person even exists who like is completely blissfully satisfied with their career. I think that's just impossible. So with Gia, the female main character, she works at this, I made basically a spoof of Cosmopolitan magazine and called it Mimosa magazine. And she basically works there as a relationship writer, and they make her write all these really dumb fluffy pieces of like how to get kissed at midnight on New Year's Eve, and like 5 ways to give the best blowjob, and just random stuff like that. And she hates the job, but the reason she works there is because her mother used to love reading the magazine before she died of cancer. And so she's, kind of having this cognitive dissonance about working here. And then at night, she moonlights as an anonymous blogger, debunking all the shit they make her write at Mimosa. But what she wants to do is become a matchmaker, and she's done like matchmaking for like friends and family, but she really wants to take it big. And her, conundrum is basically like, how do I make this happen for me while I'm still at the magazine? Because I also want to honor what my mom loved about the magazine, and I wanted to be something that she would be proud of because of me. And that's how she kind of gets into matchmaking her colleague to prove to her boss that she's worthy of helming the new matchmaking column at the magazine. And the funny thing is, this subplot of like her matchmaking her colleague for the sake of an assignment at work was my editor's idea. Initially, she was only matchmaking her colleague because it was fun, which is actually how it happens in the original Emma. And my editor was like, let's maybe add some more conflict and some more stakes here. And I was like, good idea. And my editor is amazing, by the way, May Martinez at Dell Romance. Like she's such a genius. As for Jeman, the male main character, he's running a pub and he's basically going broke. Um, and his whole, character arc with respect to his career is like, how do I make my pub break even, or at least make some profits without feeling like I'm a failure, without feeling like what my dad told me about you're never gonna make it as a pub owner. Like, how do I prove him wrong without making this about him? And I think his arc with respect to career didn't change much throughout drafting. I feel like he's definitely a fan favorite with readers. And I think there's very little work I had to do with him when it came to drafting or even revising or editing, because I don't know, I just loved writing him. And I feel like his career, thing of like, how do I make this even happen? Because what if I'm a failure? I feel like that's very relevant to most people, because I think a lot of us deal with that imposter syndrome. I know I dealt with it, when I was querying so many agents and getting rejections after rejections. So it was very easy to write it for him. But I think with Gia's arc, it took me a while to really figure out what and how to write it. And my editor was a huge help with that.
Yeah, I read your book and I really enjoyed it, and I loved the elements about working in media and digital media. That was my career before I pivoted to writing full time. I I worked for TED, and I ran the social media, and I spent so much time just watching. Well, this basically is my answer to the question. Like, when I worked in that space, that was the 2014 till like 2019, which was a really strange moment for digital media, where Facebook had taken over, video had become like ascendant. Everyone wanted Facebook video, and then Instagram, and then Reels, and then stories. And so it used to be that my job was driving traffic to articles, get people from Facebook to watch TED Talks on TED.com or read articles. And then the floor kind of fell out, and everything became about keeping people on the social media networks. And it triggered this complete collapse of places like BuzzFeed and Upworthy, and a lot of these, and TED itself in some ways, like these websites and publications that had been built for this very specific moment in the internet that then couldn't survive. And I watched all of my friends in the industry get laid off over and over and over again. And especially journalists, but also video editors and like graphic designers. And it was just wave after wave of layoffs as this industry collapsed. And I was kind of shielded for a while when I worked at TED, but then after I left TED also had a bunch of layoffs. So I was really inspired is the wrong word. I was very enraged by that. And so I wanted to write about a woman who's working in this space, who has been laid off, has had her quote unquote dream job at one of these BuzzFeed type publications, but in the end of the day had no job security, and it wasn't super sustainable, and it didn't even pay well. So how dream job is a job that doesn't actually like pay for your rent. And she's kind of lost her innocence and is now trying to navigate, well, what does a career look like that will keep me healthy, that will pay my bills, and that will not like destroy my mental health? Like, what is a good enough job as opposed to a dream job? And when she goes to her college reunion, part of the reason she goes is that her terrible boss, who she works for now, is giving the commencement address at graduation, which is happening the same weekend, because I took some liberties as an author. And she has to get through this weekend of managing her horrible boss while also having her friends who love her be like, this is your job? Like, what is going on? He's super abusive to you. You seem miserable. This is not what you ever wanted to do. And so she has to reckon with that tension of, how do I afford to be a human being while also stay alive with this terrible job? So I won't spoil the ending, but it was definitely drawn from my own experiences working in these dream jobs that are actually nightmares, and asking the question that I think a lot of young people are asking, and millennials, people in their 30s and 40s, are asking, of what does it mean to be successful when the old career paths that used to be available are no longer available, and the rate of living is getting higher, and we're all super isolated. How do we find a happily ever after when shit's pretty bad, just look around us? So yeah, career is a big theme, and kind of redefining the happily ever after, both in relationships and also just in community and careers. And it's not a romance where she has a glamorous job. She has the shittiest job. They all kind of do in the book.
Yeah, I feel like both of your main characters need to get drinks together or something.
That
They
would
would
be
be
so
friends.
much fun. I feel like
Yeah.
Ella and I should also catch up if we ever are in the same country at the same time. All of you, honestly. Like, I feel like I have so many author friends that I've literally never met in person because I live in India. And I feel so much FOMO sometimes. So I'm really glad we have virtual panels like this. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Christine, I want to ask you about the family and ocean song, because they're really strong for both of your main characters. And I wanted to know if you could talk about creating the various family side characters, and if you had trouble with any one particular, and if you did, how did you solve that?
Yeah, so I grew up in a pretty tight-knit family unit. Like, I kind of, so my mom, my brother, and my dad, and I are all very, very close. We keep in touch regularly. So I tend to reflect that in my books. And my little brother is actually my oldest best friend. So because of that, all of my characters have a sibling, whether it's a brother or sister. Like Angie in Oceanside has a sister, and the character in my current work in progress has a little brother. Like my brother's in California, my dad is here in Tennessee, which is where I am right now, and my mom lives with me, and I talk to them like multiple times a week. So the hardest character for me to write actually was Rosie, which is Angie's 5-year-old niece. And that was because I don't have kids of my own. I don't have any cousins or nieces or nephews of that age. And most of my friends have kids who are either too young or too old. And you know how kids' development changes so rapidly as they're growing up. So to address that, I would go online. I would research how would a 5-year-old girl act? What's a typical 5-year-old, behavior? How did they walk? How did they talk? But it didn't compare to when my coworkers had a daughter who had just happened to turn 5. She didn't know I wrote, so I just sat there one day during lunch. I'm like, "Can I ask you a question?" She's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Oh, by the way, I'm writing a book." She's like, "Oh, you're writing a book?" I'm like, "Yes, I'm getting published, and I need your help writing a 5-year-old girl." So of course, like most mothers, she was very, very happy to show me videos of her daughter, tell me all of our daughter. She would tell me like, funny things that she would say. She would come in and say, "Oh, my daughter said this. Maybe you can use this in your book." And so she would show me videos, tell me stories, show me pictures, and that was so helpful. And I consider myself very lucky to have had the opportunity. And so that helped a lot in making Angie's niece a lot more realistic.
So you solved your problem by finding some people with some real 5-year-olds to talk to.
Yes. I'm like, I know one person with a 5-year-old kid, and I'm going to go and just ask and pummel them with questions.
Speaking of that, though, Swati and Ella, did you have to do any research or like anything that you had to look up that you didn't expect?
Yeah, so because Jaiman is, a culinary expert and like he owns a pub, which I know nothing about, because I only started getting into cooking, I think like 2 months ago, and I wrote this book in 2022 or 2021. So I had to do a lot of research on like how does one actually run a pub? What kind of because there's a lot of mentions of like him coming up with his own cocktail recipes in the book, and so I had to like do a lot of due diligence of like which spirits mix with which flavors. And like there's this one drink that he makes in honor of Gia, which is called the whipped rose, inspired by her rosy perfume. And I actually had to write the exact recipe for a pre-order campaign for the book. And at that moment I was like, oh no, because what if the ingredients I mentioned in the book, because he mentions like vodka, tequila, triple sec, rose syrup, and like pink lemonade. And I was like, what if these things actually taste horrible? Like, what do I do then? But then, so for my birthday party earlier this year in March, when I turned 28, I actually made that cocktail for all of my friends. And they said it was the best cocktail they'd ever had. And I agreed with it because like it was so delicious. So I guess it all worked out perfectly. But yeah, I think coming up with the cocktail recipes and just the mentions of food and drink in the book, I think that was very challenging for me to do, because I don't know. I can't even tell if there's too much salt in a dish. Like I'll just be like, oh no, it's fine, tastes fine to me, because I literally cannot tell. So I think that was the biggest thing for me to research, is like how does food work? Like yeah.
That's amazing. I do not have a sophisticated palate. I eat a lot of chicken nuggets. So whenever people are talking about like food and cooking, I'm like, yeah, I did research into weird things. My main character, Charlotte, is an artist, and I did a lot of research, not a lot of research. I spent a lot of time fooling around at the Greenwich Public Library where I was writing a lot of the later revisions of the book. And I did a lot of research into color theory and just different visual styles of art. Charlotte, as a character, is very emotionally repressed and very bad at talking about her feelings, but she experiences a lot of the world through color. And a friend of hers gave her, it's called I don't know what it's officially called, but there's like the feelings and sensation wheel that you might have seen on Instagram that is a therapeutic tool where you can it's like a big wheel of different colors, and each one has a different type of feeling associated with it. And so people can use it when they're feeling really ungrounded, or nonverbal, to communicate just where they are in the feelings. And so that became like a central theme or motif in the book, of Charlotte kind of communicating even to herself how she's feeling and what color she associates with it. So I took out a lot of books about colors just to have other words for purple or green. I learned a lot of different color terms, which was genuinely really fun. And also like the history of concert posters and like different typography, and like what type of art would she have been making in college. Like she has a lot of flashbacks to creating posters for her friend's radio show and like different art she made. So I'm a very word person, not an art person. I'm visually just kind of clueless, so I tried to learn as much as I could, in that way. And she's also a survivor of different types of abuse. And I'm a survivor too, so a lot of that was based on personal experience. But I took out a lot of books about narcissism and different cycles of abuse, and like every domestic violence book at the library. Like I think the librarians were a little concerned, and I was like, it's cool, we're good. But I tried to learn a lot about like different fear responses and survival mechanisms that people turn to. So, and I've gotten a lot of feedback from readers that that has felt very realistic and familiar and helpful. So I'm really glad that I went full dork and like learned about all the different fear responses. But libraries help so many books happen. I am so grateful to my public library.
I just want to remind everyone that if you have questions, feel free to drop in the chat. I want to ask, Ellie, you brought up your main character and the difficulty with feelings and vulnerability, and I want to ask you, what drew you to that theme specifically with your main character in But How Are You Really? Because I think that one is really universal in a way that can impact a lot of people in a variety of different ways.
Yeah, I think something really unique to romance is like this is a genre with a lot of big feelings, and feelings are very important, but a lot of us are pretty terrible at understanding our feelings or communicating our feelings or asking for help. And I wanted to write a character who is really at a crisis point in her life. She's depressed, she's feeling very helpless, she's angry, and she's alienated herself. She's isolated herself from all of the people who would step up and be her support network. The original title for the book was just The Reunion, which unfortunately there are a lot of books named The Reunion. And we were thinking about what are the main themes of the book. And my friend Gabe was the person who was like, why not just call it But How Are You Really? Because that is the dreaded question that everyone hates being asked when they're really not doing great. And that for me was one of those moments where I was like, oh, that is what the book is about. It's about actually asking yourself and being honest with others about how you're doing. And I think that it's extra applicable for Charlotte because she is this abuse survivor, and she's kind of not good at sharing what that means, what that was like, how that impacts her mood and her sense of safety and her ability to love again and have a new relationship. But really, everyone in the book is going through something, whether it's being alienated from their parents because they're marrying their gay sweetheart, or a lot of Charlotte's friends were in a support group in college together called the Dead, Divorced, and Otherwise Disappointing Parents Support Group. And it was just a space for them to share. Most of them were queer and had difficult relationships with their families. And so sharing feelings and providing community support and a collective sense of aid and chosen family is really important. So yeah, this is just a book about big feelings and being bad at talking about them and learning how and meeting each other in the middle. And it wasn't until much later in the process where I was like, oh, this is actually my problem. This is me. I wrote about myself. I need to work on this.
Yeah, as you were talking, I was thinking my toxic trait is reading a book and being frustrated that characters won't tell each other how they feel, but then also being incredibly unable to ask for help. Like I feel like that is, but how are you really?
Yeah, I always am annoyed by the miscommunication trope in romance where it's like you all just have this one vital piece of information which if you shared everything would be fine. And I wanted to write a book that's more about like why is the miscommunication even happening as opposed to what is the piece of information. Like for much of the book, Reese, her love interest, doesn't know that she's an abuse survivor and that that's why their relationship didn't work the first time. And I wanted the tension to be how is she going to tell him and why is it so hard as opposed to oh my god just tell him. So yeah, I feel you on that.
Speaking about tropes, I want to know from everybody what some of your favorite, and if you want to share, not favorite tropes, sure, but what some of your favorite tropes are in the romance genre. Christine, you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, my favorite ones are easy. I love childhood friends to lovers, I love enemies to lovers, and I love second chance romance. I am a sucker for those three. So the ones I'm not a huge fan of, I'm actually not a huge fan of the accidental pregnancy trope, just because I can't relate to it. So, like, cool. I'm happy for the character, but that's it.
Swati, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you. So my favorite trope is obviously friends to lovers, which is why I wrote a friends to lovers book, and that's what I'm debuting with. I just feel like slow burn and friends to lovers and like romance novels where like the focus is more on their feelings and like getting to know each other and then falling for each other and then the attraction kind of building. Like that's what I really like. So I guess in that sense, the tropes I don't like is probably just like insta love or like insta lust, because that just doesn't make sense to me at all. But also going along with what Christine said, I don't really like the accidental pregnancy trope much either because I don't think I want to have kids at all. So I would just be like, I mean, I've read some amazing books with with that trope, but for me personally, I feel like that's not something I would see myself writing ever. Because I don't think I would really connect to it myself, or even connect to the main character myself, and I think that's important for me to do as an author.
Yeah, I think accidental pregnancy, especially considering for those of us in the US, like the current political situation around pregnancy and reproductive rights, it's taken a turn and it makes it harder for me to enjoy that kind of trope. Yeah, I trying to think. I love second chance romance. I my book is a second chance romance. I love how in a typical romance people are kind of here and you need to get them to here, but in a second chance they're often here because they've tried this once and they've hurt each other and they have to like really repair what's going on. So I love a good second chance romance. I've never been a friends to lovers person, but I've begun reading more of them lately, and it is just so satisfying the way that like one person might fall before the other and like how do they navigate that and then the moment of oh my god wait this is reciprocated but also the stakes are so high because we don't want to ruin what we have like there's so much in there that's wonderful. I just read We Could Be So Good by Kat Sebastian, and I was just like edge of my seat the entire book of like these two gay journalists in 1960 New York who are like best friends. And I was just screaming at this like slow burn. Oh my God, it was so good. Kat is amazing at what she does. But yeah, I've never been like I'm reading a book for the trope, but when a trope is deployed well and like reinvented, oh, the best.
We've fully moved into the in the US accidental pregnancy trope being the handmaid's tale.
Yes.
I want yeah. I want to know also from you all if you have a favorite ship in a book or a media. So like, TV, um I was going to say music, but I don't know if that exists, but TV, film, anything like that. Swati, do you want to start?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like this is such a random answer. I mean, I don't think it's random, but like one of the first ships that I loved, that I kind of grew up with was Katniss and Peeta from the Hunger Games. And I think that's what I would kind of go with, because I feel like that's this amazing kind of vibe of like, first of all, Peter Mellark is like book boyfriend of all time if he were age appropriate, obviously. And I feel like the way, and for those of you who haven't read The Hunger Games, I don't want to spoil anything, but like there's this one line that Katniss says towards the end of the book where, like, Peter's like the dandelion in the spring. And I'm just like, yes, like that is like, that's what I want. And that's how I want someone to feel when they're with me. And I feel like Katniss and Peter was just one of the most formative ships I read in books when I was growing up. And I think for me that's kind of become like the standard now. Like I need a guy like Peter Millark, like that's the standard, and if you don't meet that, then you're out. So I would say Candace and Peter, Everlark, as some people call it. Yeah.
What about you, Christine?
All right, so just before I say mine, just a disclaimer, I do not seek out this kind of relationship in real life, and I do not write this kind of relationship. But my favorite ship is probably Christine Daae and Eric from Phantom of the Opera. I know it's not a healthy relationship because he's older, he's murderous, and he's obsessed with her. But I think it's mostly because the actors in the films and the shows have so much chemistry, and their songs together are just so amazing. And I think they have better chemistry than like Christine and Raoul, who she eventually ends up marrying. So I'm gonna go with that as my answer.
Yo, yes. Beneath the Moonless Sky in Love Never Dies is one of the horniest songs in the world. Like, the talk about second chance. Like, obviously very problematic. He's a murderer. Power dynamics are bad, but oh, yes. I had like a visceral reaction when you mentioned them. I've gone through a lot of different ships over the years. I mean, I started as a writer in middle school writing Harry Potter fan fiction, and obviously my relationship to that property has changed a lot given J.K. Rowling being who she is now. But I really learned to write, especially to write romance as a teen, writing Draco Hermione fan fiction. And like now that I'm an adult, I'm like, oh, that was kind of also messed up. There's a lot of like racism and weird stuff going on. And now as an adult, I'm like, I don't know if I would find that sexy anymore. But there's a lot in there about rivalry and what is it, like hurt comfort, and they have so much chemistry as characters, and the actors did in the franchise, and like there's a reason why like a million shippers are still diehard for those two. I am now in a very opposite direction, watching a lot of Star Trek, and that show it's so wholesome. All of the different generations of that show are so wholesome. I can understand why fan fiction like was born through Star Trek. And I don't even have a particular ship. I just ship everyone with everyone else in Star Trek. Like everyone is so sweet and doing their best, and all of the actors are very hot. Yeah, I don't know. I kind of just want to write some like happy in space family, non-incestuous, everybody's, I don't know, like a giant polycule spaceship book now is what I'm craving, which I'll read more Becky Chambers. Like that's there you go.
I agree. I think you should write that. I would be very much in favor. I love what your description of like Star Trek. Everyone's doing their best because it's so true. They're just all trying so hard. Thank you everyone so much for joining. Also, thank you to everyone in the chat. I've left everybody's book links in the description box below, so please check them out. Pre-order Christine's book and pick up everybody else's book that is out already. And I hope everyone has a really great rest of your day, hopefully curling up with a good romance read for the rest of your weekend. Bye everybody.
Yeah. Bye. Thank you so much for having us.
Bye.
Bye. Enjoy the weekend.